Welcome back to the NFL season, everybody. I hope you all have been well. With the NFL preseason, starting tonight, I'll be more active with weekly episodes and updates regarding the NFL. And also for the future of this podcast, I'll also be focusing on the NBA when that starts back up again. And my goal for the podcast is, just to grow through my social media, which, the video games that I post on my YouTube channel are helping in terms of subscribers. Haven't exactly seen the translation too much with the non-football episodes, like that, seeing that correlation. But hey, still got time to improve. Another change that I'll have, for the podcast this season is I'll be talking more about football. I'll use a football analogy. I'll be talking more about the X's and O's, truly talking about my knowledge of football. A lot of people on social media, they'll, get the all 22 footage and, they'll kind of look at the film themselves. I'm not 100% sure I'll do that, but I'll kind of figure something out that, I can do with the resources that I have. Because I definitely could, look at film of, say, a Ravens game and, post it on social media and, it turn out well. I think that is something that I can do. I'm just not sure too much yet. And then also kind of was just the preseason because last year I recorded my very first episode before week 1 of the regular season. I did not do any preseason content. So with preseason, the focus is going to be to try to highlight the rookies while also kind of taking note of the team starters. I'll talk about any stories leading up to these games because not a lot of people watch preseason. And for some of the week 1 preseason games, you'll obviously hear more from me just because those are what I've heard about or I'm curious about. Some I don't really have much to say about. Others, you'll hear a lot. And also, I won't really be picking winners because it's preseason, but I would say the winners are more so the individual players themselves. And, like, yes, that would correlate to the team, but, like, I don't know, just like seeing certain players, if they, like Trey Lance, for example, in the Hall of Fame game, a lot of people on social media were talking about, oh, these teams need to trade for him, which I do think that Trey Lance, he had a good performance, but I think that, my focus is more so just going to be questions and concerns for certain teams, while others, I'll be diving into some information. So, ironically, the first preseason game is the Colts versus the Ravens. And so, kind of talking about, some of the stuff that I heard coming out of training camp, for the Ravens, which this is just stuff I've seen online. Obviously, going into this season, the Ravens secondary, it could be one of the best secondary units the Ravens have ever had. They've got Marlon Humphrey, Jair Alexander, and Nate Wiggins all at corner. They got Kyle Hamilton, and the unknown being Malachi Starks, the Ravens first round draft pick from Georgia this past season, who I do believe will be a great addition to the Ravens, secondary as a whole, because the first 9 weeks last season, the Ravens secondary was they just were not, so many miscommunications. But I do believe as long as, the secondary stays healthy, I believe the front seven will have a great season because I believe there'll be a lot of coverage sacks. Now, I'm not really sure how much of the Ravens starters we'll see tonight, whether it's on offense or defense. As a fan, I'm not expecting to see Lamar Jackson. I mean, if he's out there for maybe one drive, not a bad idea. But I think the only, we'll say, starter on defense that I would expect to see for at least a quarter will be Malachi Starks, just to see how he truly fits in this Ravens defense. And also during training camp, I've heard a lot about Jair Alexander, him just connecting with, the Ravens team as a whole, him just making great plays, in training camp. And just, I think that, if he has a great season, who knows? The Ravens could try to offer him a good contract. And also the story throughout the week between the Colts and Ravens would be the physical, fist fight, that happened between Ravens. Also, please correct me if I've gotten these names wrong in the comments. Keon Martin and Colts Tyler Goodson started shoving each other after a drill. And then I guess the part that caught my attention more would be Ravens DB Nate Wiggins was throwing uppercuts, which Marlon Humphrey posted on his Instagram, him, commenting on it again next to Nate Wiggins, and Nate Wiggins just did not respond. I'm sure some things were said. I'm curious. Honestly, when I read the tweets, that he was throwing uppercuts, I kind of thought it was funny just because I didn't expect throwing uppercuts. Normally, you just hear throwing punches, but like I guess when I think of like athletes throwing punches, like specifically football players, it's like I'm not gonna try to punch you in the face. You got on a helmet. I might break my hand. But that's besides the point. The Colts will likely play some of their starters because, they've got, questioned that quarterback because on their depth chart with the QB1, literally they have it's literally listed as Anthony Richardson or Daniel Jones. So I'm sure that, both will see some, action against the Ravens tonight. And I don't think people should put too much stock into it. Like, I don't think people should be making videos, which I'm sure there will be if they both play well tonight. People will make videos on TikTok saying, "Oh my gosh, teams who should trade for Anthony Richardson or, Daniel Jones in this instance." I think people should pay attention to if both these quarterbacks come out confident, play with poise, because Anthony Richardson, he's got the arm strength. He just does not have like the accuracy or touch. And Daniel Jones, he had the one good season when the Giants made it to the playoffs a couple years ago, and then kind of just I don't know. He almost kind of just seems like goofy to me. I don't really know how to like truly describe it or put it into words. But regardless, I think some people have been talking about maybe Anthony Richardson might be like a package quarterback, kind of like how the Steelers used Justin Fields the first few games, where he would make last season, where he would come in, maybe take a play or two, typically a read option, but also he had the ability to throw. I mean, I'm curious with that, and also another report being Colts wide receiver, I believe Adonai, I don't know how to correctly pronounce it, but Mitchell, had an amazing week against the Ravens secondary. Just beating pretty much every Ravens DB one on one, in drills, and this preseason could be huge for him to determine the kind of season he might have because some people kind of classified his season last year as disappointing, which I'm not sure if that's the word I would use. If anything, maybe their season, the Colt season as a whole. But now moving on to the Bengals versus Eagles. I imagine the Eagles will be playing very few of their starters due to their roster being so good, kind of similar to the Ravens, so to speak. I imagine if people like Jalen Hurts, play, it might be one series, or I highly doubt Saquon Barkley plays. But, if any of their starters play, I imagine it may be just one series. But if there's any starters that play a significant amount of time, it might be those who are competing for a starting job. And the Bengals, I have heard that they will be playing some of their starters tonight. So people like yeah, tonight. I'm sorry, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I'm not sure about the defensive side of the ball, but the reasoning behind it was just to try to get players acclimated before the regular season. Which, despite the Bengals being a divisional rival, I do think it's a pretty good move because the last few years the Bengals have had a slow start to the season, which kind of hurt them in the end. And like by that I mean like they might start out like 2-4, 2-5, go on like a crazy run, but then maybe drop like a game or two that they gotta have, and so then like they'd have to play perfect football. Like I truly think that two games that describe perfectly how the Bengals season went last year is when they played the Ravens, because they had the Ravens dead to rights both times, and just still that defense in which that's the big that offense. We already know that offense is going to produce. The defense is the bigger question. So for out of the games tonight, my guess would be the Raiders in Seattle will probably have the most starters for the Thursday night preseason games, only because the teams are so new. Like by that I mean the Raiders, they got Pete Carroll, who's the Seattle head coach for long time. And I'm sure he's gonna hand the ball off to Ashton Genty a lot, early in the game, while also giving Geno Smith some time to kind of get warmed up, get acclimated, to like the Las Vegas offense, like new team and everything. And also on the Seattle side, they've got to see what they've got with Sam Darnold. Outside of Darnold's playoff collapse against the Rams last year when he was on the Vikings, he did have a good season. And so like I think they got to see what they have, because I mean they have Jackson Smith and Jigba, which I would believe is going to be their wide receiver one going into the season. They no longer have DK Metcalf. They no longer have him, which in a way I'm still shocked that DK Metcalf was on the Steelers. But anyways, it's Mike McDonald's second season. He was also the Ravens defensive coordinator the year they went to the AFC Championship in 2023. Lamar Jackson's second MVP season. I'm sure if at the very least the Seattle's defense will play, okay tonight. Browns versus Panthers. The Browns are the team I'm most excited, curious. I don't know. Only because I'm curious to see how much playing time Shador and Dylan Gabriel will get. They've got so many quarterbacks. You might as well call them collecting. You might as well call them Thanos the way that they're collecting quarterbacks the way he was collecting Infinity Stones. But regardless, I would not be surprised if both of them, at least got a quarter or at least, 2 to 3 series to kind of see what they've got. Because if I remember correctly, Kenny Pickett is nursing a hamstring injury. I want to say Joe Flacco. I'm not 100% sure. It might be actually, to be honest, it might be the two young quarterbacks that are nursing hamstring injuries. I might be mixing that up. The Panthers. I do believe they've gotten, a better offense for Bryce Young. They got the Arizona wide receiver, Tetaroa McMillan, I believe that is how you pronounce his name. And I've heard that, they've been, showing like developing a lot of good chemistry, during this time. And so we'll have the chance to see them get, live reps. Um, Lions versus Falcons. I'm not going to really talk too much about the Lions, but I'm curious to see how, they'll bounce back considering that in the Hall of Fame game, I think they had 5 turnovers. But for the Falcons, I'm curious to see how long Michael Penix plays. It's practically an extension to his rookie season, and I do think they'll have a chance to compete in the NFC South. They had a chance last year, but then just had that collapse. Um, and so, I'm very curious about that. Also, I saw on social media that I don't know if this is their official nickname. We'll just call this their fan name. 9 to 5, aka Michael Penix to uh, Drake London, which I do think that's a kind of cool nickname. I'm not gonna lie, but we'll kind of see how their season goes. Also, let me know what you think so far of kind of just some of the general thoughts I have. It's preseason. It's a little harder to truly dive in because I've been paying attention to the training camp reports and yeah, no. Also, this year I'm going to do my best to go to an NFL game this year. Going to do my best to make it happen. Um, enough little bit of a break just because I was yapping for 10 straight minutes, kind of slowing down the flow a little bit. Talking about the Commanders versus the Patriots. I'm curious to see how the starters will play just because Jaden Daniels, Drake May, young quarterbacks who had, good seasons. Drake May with the time that he had, and Jaden Daniels, everybody knows how much media attention that Jaden Daniels got. Um, I've heard reports that Jaden Daniels was taking a huge step as a leader, holding guys more accountable. But honestly, he's not even my biggest, I guess, curiosity seeking point that I have. I'm more curious about when slash if Terry McLaurin will get his deal because he had his best season last year. I understand I believe he's approaching 30 or he will be 30. I'm not 100% sure. And for football, that's, I guess, not even I guess, that's when people as fans or, like organizations, that's when, they get concerned with certain positions. But I do think that he's worth the money, yeah, that he, was asking for. He deserves his payday. I mean, base, he's been through, I think, what? Their original name, the name they had for the 2020 season, the Washington football team, and then now the Commanders. Um, so basically, multiple name changes, a bunch of different quarterbacks, and I saw a stat saying for people who've played as long as he's played, he's I believe, one of the few, if not the only one, to basically have at least 800 yards in every season of his career. To for those who would have played the same amount, like I think this is his 7th season. So basically, for a player's first 7 seasons, which I believe I saw that stat out of context because people like Mike Evans exists. He's had 1,000 yards. I'm pretty sure every year of his career. So obviously, people don't believe everything you see on the internet. Now, I'm going to do a little bit more research on that Terry McLaurin stat that I had seen, see if I can find that. I saw it on Instagram. So I think that, I fell for, some parody account, which even though that it just was stat related, it wasn't like NBA Centel, which that one is typically clear and obvious, even though that some people tend to fall for it. But I get it. The way I'm talking about it, it's very possible I fell for an inaccurate stat. Giants versus Bills, I'm more concerned about how the Giants offense will look. Oh, wait, also, to go back to the Patriots, I do believe they're going to have, I guess a culture shock for post Belichick era, just because, they've had some bad seasons. They've had some bad seasons. I do think we'll probably get to see them, truly look different, like truly, I guess, adapting to football today. But with one preseason game, that'll be too soon to tell. But with the Giants versus Bills, I'm concerned about how their offense will look. And I'm also concerned about how much time Jackson Dart will play. Like, I hear very much mixed things about him. Like, some reports I'll hear saying, oh, he's doing well. I think he had a nice back shoulder throw to somebody. I could not tell you the player's name. But then other reports saying that, oh, he's looking bad. So it's like, I think his first rep in training camp was a pick six. Which I'm sorry to Jackson Dart if you somehow find this. This is not me bashing you. If I misspoke, I apologize. But just in general, I've heard very mixed like thoughts about him. For Texans and Vikings, how long will JJ McCarthy, the Vikings quarterback, be in the game? And no matter his stat line, people should not get too hype. I think people should focus more on how the offense will look and be more excited about that rather than just his individual performance. And I'm also curious about how much the Texans starters will play because injuries played a huge role with this team last year. And, Christian Kirk, wide receiver, he had a great training camp, in the slot. So, just kind of concerned. Maybe they'll play a quarter. Who knows? Um, Steelers versus Jaguars. Will we see Travis Hunter on both sides of the ball? On the Jaguars, because every team posting their depth chart on social media and online in general, he was listed as a starting wide receiver and a backup corner for the Jags. Do I think Travis Hunter should play both sides? I definitely think he has the talent for it. I think if I was the head coach of the Jaguars, I think I would use Travis Hunter more where I thought I would need him more for each week because you game plan differently against different teams, obviously. So like if I'm playing against like one of the better passing teams in the league, I'm probably gonna try to lean to use him a little bit more on defense for that specific game. But then maybe if um another game where maybe the Jaguars are playing against a team with a bad passing defense, okay, maybe I'll use him more on the offensive side. Um, I can understand that he wants to try to play both sides, and like I'm obviously not somebody who can stop him from playing both sides. I just would be concerned with the toll that it would take to play both, specifically in the NFL. Because like Deion Sanders didn't even play both. Like by didn't play both, I mean yes, he got snaps in on offense. He caught some passes and everything. But what I'm saying is he was what nine. I don't have Deion Sanders stats in front of me, so I would imagine that a significant maybe 90% of his time would have been at corner. The only time where like when I see like his highlights that I would have seen him catching passes would have been when he was on the Cowboys. Didn't really see him do that on other teams. I'm sure he probably did, but I'm sure the Cowboys were the team that used him the most at a wide receiver during Deion Sanders' career. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. Please. I like when people are gonna, comment saying, hey Jaron, you're totally wrong. Deion Sanders was used a lot as wide receiver. He had 50 receptions, blah blah blah. Um, but for the Steelers, I'm just curious on how they'll approach the preseason. Everyone's always questioning the offense, and that's how I am also. And I'm pretty sure I heard about Will Howard. He's not going to really be able to play in the preseason. He was kind of who I was excited about personally, but now that knowing that he will likely not play this preseason, I imagine we'll probably see Mason Rudolph and I believe Skylar Thompson a bit more. Playing in the preseason at this point does seems like a formality to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, hey, maybe he'll show up and play for the last preseason game. I'm not saying that he won't be on the sideline, but I'd be very, very surprised if he suited up. For the Cowboys versus Rams, only got one thing to say. How long until Micah Parsons gets paid? It's the only thing I think that needs to be said. Just because I think that's going to be the only storyline that comes out after this game, no matter how it's played. Moving on to the Titans versus Bucks. It is the Titans QB, who's also the number one overall pick, Cam Ward's debut. I'm wondering how much playing time he'll get, considering Will Levis, I believe, had season-ending surgery. A lot of people were talking about his media training because he didn't have the most sensitive comment toward Will Levis. But also, like, I understand that he, if I had to take a guess, that like, of course, that he's probably going to care because that's his teammate. That's a person that he probably has spent a lot of time with this past summer. But I do understand that he's more focused on himself than others. So like I understand the comment a little bit, and also he had really good comments about basically he watched growing up. He watched his dad go to work every day for a job that he didn't like, and so basically what he was saying is that he football is something he does like, so that like he has fun doing it. So he kind of made that. I'm kind of giving the short version of his comment, at least that one, but I really did like when he said that. So kind of talking about the Bucks, they drafted Ohio State wide receiver Emeka Egbuka, who originally I was kind of hoping went to the Ravens, but it did make sense for the Bucks considering Chris Godwin. He might not be ready for Week 1. Like I hear reports saying that he might not. I know that they probably don't want to rush him, but regardless, with Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka, and Chris Godwin, and of course they've got other weapons on offense, they might be a top unit passing the ball. They might be a top 10 team passing with a healthy Chris Godwin. Like if Chris Godwin, yes, he's had some bad, injuries, but if Chris Godwin is even 80% of what he was, why? Jets versus Packers. I'm more curious. I combined the two words. I'm more curious about how Justin Fields will look this year. There was the report about, basically offensive lineman stepping on his toe, which at first people called it a lower leg injury, then specified with the toe. But regardless, I'm kind of just concerned, how the offense will look around him. Like, I'm praying for him, man. I really am. I think that he can be a great quarterback. I just think he needs to be given the opportunity. Personally, I wanted the Steelers to keep Justin Fields. I'm saying that as a Ravens fan. Packers, I don't really have much to say about the Packers. Just their jerseys that they released a few weeks ago. I did not like them. I didn't like the Chargers. I mean, those are bright. I wouldn't buy that jersey if I was a Chargers fan personally, but I thought those were better than the Packers. Chiefs and Cardinals. I'm more just curious about how the starters will play on both teams. I'm not really guessing Patrick Mahomes is going to play in this first preseason game. Maybe some of their other players will. I'm sure the Cardinals will have some of their starters play, like Marvin Harrison Jr. I'm sure he'll get maybe the first quarter. And, a lot of people kind of, I don't know, I feel like people are just weird about, Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, I don't know, I think people put a lot of, like, I understand that it's important to put, stock in a rookie's, first season, but like, some people, they won't put up those monster numbers, their first season. Like that. And I'm pretty sure that if I have to like go back and look, I will. I'm pretty sure Kyler Murray did not play all of last season. He played a decent portion of it, but I'm pretty sure he didn't play, from like week 1 to the final game. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Only a couple games left. We've got the Broncos versus the Bears. Broncos versus the Bears. I'm reading two different parts of my notes. Broncos versus the 49ers. I don't have too much to say, but I do think the Broncos offensive starters will play. It seems like something Sean Payton would do. And for the 49ers side, I'm more curious on will Kyle Shanahan survive the season as the 49ers head coach? Over the years, I've heard lots of comments from NFL players about him as a coach. And so, like, it's just, I don't know. Like, I think that, with the 49ers, I believe they have an easier schedule. So, like, I do believe, as long as people stay healthy, I do believe that, he'll be their coach. But, I mean, if they underperform with the roster they have, which, I mean, I get it. Their roster did take a hit, but they still do have a good roster. And they have one of the easier schedules. I think if you underperform with one of the easier schedules in the NFL, he might be on his way out. Dolphins versus the Bears. Bears fans. Matter how the starters look, please don't overreact. Normally, people would say that about the Cowboys. And I get that too. I feel that same way towards them too. But I'm only saying this as in be a little realistic. I guarantee I will hear from somebody in my life Oh, it's the same old Bears BS. Like I'm sure I will hear that at least once. I've heard the reports that Caleb Williams hasn't been looking as good during some of the drills. But I do think the team needs some time to mesh because, there have been comments like the culture change is just very, very noticeable. People, if they're lining up wrong, they're basically, not getting like those reps. And so, like, I think the Bears a little bit more time. I think maybe going into week one, if the Bears preseason, from how much their starters play, if it does not look as good, then okay, yes, I think you can be concerned. But at the same time, a lot of teams with their starters during the preseason, their starters don't go all out. So, like, I think as long as you see steady improvement from your team, regardless of you being a Bears fan or not, I think that's what matters. Now, next, for the Dolphins. The same thoughts I had about Kyle Shanahan, I kind of have about Mike McDaniels because I kind of hear some of the same things about Mike McDaniels, especially with that first season. And, he might be kind of too much of a chill coach. Like, I don't know, like, how to describe it. But like I wonder if he might get scapegoated because of like a bad performance during the regular season, like Robert Saleh, like how he got fired last season, the former Jets head coach. I'm not too sure. But really, the last game, the Saints versus Chargers, I think the Saints should trade for Shador, one of the Browns quarterbacks. Like, I think they should. I get it. They drafted. I hear different pronunciations. Tyler Show, Tyler Shuck. I don't understand how they get Shuck personally, but I'm just gonna call him Tyler. Um, he went to Louisville. Um, I've not really heard good things about their quarterbacks during training camp, which might make the Saints emphasize running the football. Um, and also they've got I believe Kellen Moore as their head coach, which hopefully he simplifies the game for whoever the quarterback is. And lastly, for the Chargers, Trey Lance was the story after the Hall of Fame game. Him just looking so poised, looking so confident, looking happy. If he continues to play well in the preseason, will he secure that quarterback number two job? That is the bigger question I have there. Like, will we see more of him, in this game? We'll find out. But that's all I have for, the first preseason episode going into, the 2025-2026 season. I want to thank you all for watching. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode.